that it's a little shocking to see that you have a senior ready to graduate and ready to launch. I know it's kind of crazy, but here we are. Welcome to the senior year for the class of 2024. We met with seniors a couple of weeks ago. We did 3 different sessions for students so that we can talk with them about the process for applying to a 4-year school and also the process for other options too when graduating high school. So talking about a lot about those post-grad options. We discussed more so the nuts and bolts of how to apply. Last year, we really did kind of focus on what to look for in colleges, how to explore, narrowing those choices down. And so now it's kind of that time where we're saying, all right, guys, let's finalize our choices. Let's consider all our different types of plans and pathways. And then also, make some decisions on where we want to apply and making sure that we meet those deadlines. So we talked about that, and we also want to provide some tools and resources and just talk about next steps so that, and kind of do an overview of what we talked about with the students with all of you. So among the many different options when students graduate from high school, we want them to be able to consider a little bit of everything. I know that oftentimes students are considering the 4-year college, and sometimes they feel like that's all they hear, but we want to make sure that we emphasize that there are so many different options for our students when they graduate, which does include obviously college, but other options too. One of which is including community college. There's lots of different opportunities for students to earn an associate's degree and certificate. We have 2 great community colleges that are local here, DBC and Las Positas. Both of them come to Cal High and visit us in the spring and talk about the application process, which is when it starts for the community college. Lots of different things to consider when applying to a community college. Okay, so there's always the transfer path, which is what a lot of our students do look into, where they do generally 2 years at a community college. This typically equals 60 units for students before they transfer on to a 4-year school. And in those 60 units, they're taking care of their general ed requirements. They're also taking care of prerequisites towards their major. And a lot of students do choose to transfer as a junior, so as a 3rd year, and then go on to their 4-year school and graduate with a bachelor's degree. So lots of different options for students if they do want to consider the transfer path, or they may earn their associates and start right directly into their career. Specifically for the CSU and the UC transfer, this is typically the most popular one that we do have for our students who go to a community college in California, because we have a couple of great pathways for them. There's the UC Transfer Agreement Guarantee. This guarantees admission to one of the 6 eligible UC campuses. So currently we have 6 UC campuses that participate in the TAG, the Transfer Agreement Guarantee. That includes Davis, Merced, Irvine, Riverside, Santa Barbara, and Santa Cruz. So for all of these universities, by taking care of your general education units and your prerequisites, you are eligible for guaranteed admission to one of those UC campuses. That doesn't mean that you can't apply to any of the others. For example, Berkeley happens to be the #1 transfer school for DBC, as well as Davis and San Diego and even UCLA. So you can certainly apply to those schools. However, they just do not participate in the guarantee. There's also CSU Associate's Degree for Transfer, also guarantees admission to the CSU system. Same thing as far as major prep for transfer to any of the 23 CSU campuses. Again, you're applying in the fall of your 2nd year at community college. Great options for transfer opportunities. I would say 91%, they say, of the transfers come from California community colleges. And roughly last year, I think it was about 30% of our graduating seniors started at the community college and made that their first choice. So it's a great option for a lot of our students. Kind of going back there really quick, also to make sure that to mention the first time free tuition guarantee. I think that it really is, as far as affordability, a wonderful option for our kids. There's also technical programs that are also offered at the community college and other special schools. So culinary, cosmetology, medical, tech, lots of different options to kind of go into and programs. We also have trades and apprenticeships. So a lot of our students have been looking into that, and thankfully we do have a lot of those career paths and members from the trades and apprenticeships that do come to Cal High, and will be at our college and career night as well in October, which I think Kelly's going to talk about a little bit later. But another opportunity to, right out of college, to get some on the job learning, earn while you learn, great opportunities there. And then, of course, we want students to also, if they are interested in our military, we do have reps that come throughout the school year. Looks like you can see some dates there. The Marines are coming on the 20th of September, Air Force October 9th, Navy October 17th, and Army. We're still confirming a date with them, but they often come to our campus a few times as well. So that probably won't be the only time they come on campus. They tend to visit more than that, but a great opportunity for students if they do have an interest in joining the military to take a look at that. And I will let Kelly kind of take over.
All right, so with all those options that Cheryl just discussed, a lot of the kind of action items for those happen in the spring. So that's when the community college workshops happen. That's when there are kind of enlistment dates and trade school enrollment and all those different things, applying to the jobs. So right now, a lot of our focus is on four-year colleges just because we are in the getting started at application season for that. So there also tends to be a lot more nuts and bolts and things to consider versus the other pathways that are a little more streamlined. So four-year colleges and universities, when we are talking about those, we are talking about institutions where you can earn a bachelor's degree. So those can be public or private, and the in-state public options for California are CSU or UC systems. So that's California State University. There are 23 campuses, whereas UC, there are 9 undergraduate campuses. So when we're talking about these UC or CSU systems, you hear a lot about A through G requirements, and those are the 15 classes that students need to take to be eligible for admission to those campuses. And there's more information about that on our website, but generally speaking, if students have gotten C's or better in their classes for graduation, and then making sure that for electives they've done world language and fine art, they are on track for that. The other thing to know about UC CSU admissions is they are now test blind. So SAT, ACT are kind of big words and when we're thinking about the college application process, but it looks so different than it did a few years ago. So we're having to remind our students that for our public state schools, they will not consider SAT or ACT as a factor for admission. Even if you did perfectly on it, it won't help you for the admissions process there. So it takes off the pressure for our kids to have to test. When we're talking about four-year colleges, like I said, there's public, private, in-state, out-of-state, so lots of different options. So we have to get very comfortable with the term "it depends." As with many things, each college has their own system. So what we do for our UC-CSU might be different than what University of Oregon chooses to do, or what even Chapman colleges in California might choose to do. So this is why we're going to get into talking about tools and how to know what is required for different schools. The other thing that might be new to your seniors is thinking about deadline types for college admissions. So we have kind of our regular deadline. There's no special name for it. It's just standard, and this is what is most common. So for example, UC CSU, there's only one deadline, so that's just the standard admission deadline. And for all of you out there that have students applying to those systems, that will be November 30th. Again, not expected to know that. That's just the most common one that most of our students apply to, so throwing that out. Early action is a application type where we'll use University of Southern California, for example. So they have their standard deadline, it might be sometime in January, and they have an early action deadline that might happen in November or December is the typical timeline for that. And that isn't a commitment. It's just saying, I have my application as best as it can possibly be, and I want to find out earlier if I'm getting into this school. So it can be a great way to know what options you have on the table and then maybe tailor your college list after you start hearing back from some places. But I strongly encourage students not to submit an early application if they're not ready, because it's not like they get to go back and keep polishing their application um, if it wasn't quite where they wanted it to be. Early decision, on the other hand, is a binding agreement. That will be a similar timeline to early action, looking at November, maybe early December. But for students that are applying early decision, if they get into that college, that is where they are attending. And that can be a really big decision because one, they're not getting to know how all of the other applications they submitted turned out. If a student is accepted early decision, then they are expected to withdraw all of their other applications they had put out there. The other thing too is you are committing to that before you necessarily know the financial aid package. So it can be a really big decision, which is why students would need to get that signed off by their counselor and also talk about it really closely with their families. The last decision type is rolling decision, and whereas regular decision, you have up until say November 30th, and then colleges will start reviewing after they've all received the applications. Rolling decisions come in waves. So typically the earlier you submit, the earlier you'll hear back, but rolling deadlines often go until the spring. So there's no one firm deadline for rolling an admissions type. Next slide, please, Cheryl. Thank you. So creating a college list. We've talked about this with your students. We talked about this with them this year and last year, but one thing that we see a lot of times that's pretty detrimental to students is just having college lists that are way too big. We see students applying to far more schools than it's recommended, and all that's doing is increasing stress, and ultimately there's only so many hours in the day for students. They can't do everything on every application, so having a fine-tuned college list is really the best thing that they can do. So when we're talking about likely target reach, all these different things, what we're really saying is how do their admission statistics generally compare to the college? So a likely school, a student would want to have their student profile as kind of above the average of what that college typically accepts. Target is what implies they're right in the range there. Um, they think they have a fairly good shot of getting in, but it's a college admission. So nothing is guaranteed. As much as we wish it was, that it was like a clear cut yes or no, that's just not how it works. Reach schools are if a student's profile is slightly below where a college typically admits. So really we want the bulk of our schools to be target schools, and then a few likely schools, a few reach schools, and then we have a special category on here called wildcard schools. There are some colleges, they're very, very selective. They have acceptance rates in the single digit percentile. And the reality is the students that are rejected from these schools look a lot like the students that are accepted. It's just really hard to predict. Um, they're rejecting highly qualified applicants, and they tell us all the time they wish there was space for more, but that's just the nature here. So not wanting to spend too much energy investing into those. So find those ones if you want, right? The number on there is 0 to 2. So it is perfectly fine if students don't want to put them through that process of highly rejective schools, and they want to focus their college list other places. This is our senior guidebook. If you haven't seen it already, it is embedded within our counseling website. So under college and career, there's senior guidebook. And here's kind of the one-stop shop. We ask them to bookmark this on their computers because when they're working on college applications, it tends to be hours that counselors aren't at work, let alone awake. So this will have basically everything that they need to know in completing those applications. And it also links to a bunch of other resources as well to kind of help them with this process. Yeah, the vast majority of the time, what they're looking for is here at their fingertips, and they don't even need to wait until our drop-in hours to come get that. Okay, so Naviance may be something that you've heard about before. It is a college and career platform, so lots of different tools in here. We're going to give you a quick overview on what your seniors might want to be using this for. It did get a little bit of a facelift this year, so if you've looked at Naviance before, it looks slightly different, but essentially it's all the same functions here. One thing I do like to point out on the new homepage that I like is they have tailored that future planning. Your student can edit their path and change it to what they're considering for after high school. So they might change that to military or two-year college, and it will slightly change their to-do list items based on what they're thinking. And those can be changed at any time. So something to mess around with there. Thank you. All right, so we talked about this with your students just because it's something that they probably won't have used before. Under the About Me, they have the option to upload their test scores. Like I said, our CSUs and UCs are test blind, but if they are applying to somewhere where maybe it's test optional and they want to see how their scores stack up, they can edit that here. Additionally, the letter of rec process, which Cheryl will talk about in a little bit, the information they need to complete in order to get that process rolling can be found here as well under the surveys section. And this is all in this slideshow that they got to. So that was sent out to their inbox if they need to revisit any of this. So other things that Naviance has, it's not just a college search tool. It has tools for them to help learn more about themselves. Maybe your student is the norm and they don't quite know what they're wanting to do yet. They can do some of these free self-assessments. I say free because like I know I had to do the Strengths Explorer in grad school and pay a couple $100 to do it, and they get it for free for being a part of a district that uses Naviance. So highly recommend taking advantage of these. I think we hear a lot of times that the college admissions process or figuring out what you want to do after high school is a really big time for self-reflection. And I think that these different surveys can help students kind of put things into words that they might agree with about themselves that they didn't have the words for, and it gives it to in a nice little PDF package of, oh yeah, these things are true about me, or maybe not this one, and editing it. And I think it is really helpful for kids. The last thing I will say about Naviance for now is there are access to data in Naviance that isn't available other places. For instance, this is a scattergram. So what this does is it uses our past graduates' application results to kind of chart out who was accepted, rejected, or waitlisted at various colleges. So again, this is for Cal High students specifically, so students can see how our past graduates have fared during for certain schools in the admissions process.
All right, lots of good information. Super important. We always emphasize this with our seniors, and we want to make sure that all of you are aware. We have so many colleges that come to visit. I think today we even had just 3 visits from colleges. It was Purdue, University of Miami, and I think it was someone else. And students can sign up to meet with these reps when they do visit the campus. We think this is a great opportunity to ask questions, learn a little bit more about the campus, kind of get some highlights from the reps themselves. Another thing too to consider is that, not only are you meeting directly with them, it's often in a very small type environment. So for example, one of the schools today, there's only 5 kids that were meeting with the rep. So there was definitely a lot of opportunities for the student to ask questions, ask individualized questions too. Okay. One thing, why are they so important? They have a chance to meet directly with staff, but oftentimes the reps that they actually meet with might be the person reviewing their actual application. So that is a big difference and a great opportunity for kids to meet with colleges and their reps. So you could kind of see there they have to register through Naviance if they would like to be a part of that and visit one of them. Like I said, we have about 70 that are scheduled. I think probably about 20 already at least have come through. So there's still a lot of colleges that are coming through. Great opportunity to meet them and to even consider some that maybe you didn't really know much about, but it has a major that you're very much interested in. So good opportunity to sign up for that. All right, so kind of in the nuts and bolts things that you will find, one of the things that you will see is FERPA. And what is FERPA? FERPA stands for Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. Okay, so this is an authorization that essentially allows us to send off the records for your student. Okay, that also includes allowing us and the teachers to be able to send off the letter of rec. All right, super important that students actually have to sign off on this before we could send anything for them. But another piece of it that we want to make sure that students are aware of, we do ask the students to go ahead and waive their right to review all recommendations and supporting documents. Very important to do that simply because without doing that, colleges will not place value on the letter of recommendation because they don't trust that it's written honestly. So we do ask students to waive their right to review all recommendations and supporting documents so that we can write the best letter on their behalf. Um, and sign off on that as soon as they can. They can do that in their Common App, and there's also an opportunity to do that in Naviance. But if you are doing it on Common App, it's required. All right, so that gets us to the next question in regards to letters of recommendation. Do I even need one? All right, I think that a lot of students were kind of shocked to learn that UC and CSU, there is no teacher letter or counselor recommendation required, nor do they accept them. So a lot of kids are like, well, if I'm getting one anyway for private schools, can I send one off to the UCs or CSUs? No, you cannot. Okay, so they do not evaluate them or accept them for the UCs or CSUs. If you know for a fact that those are the only schools you're applying to, then you actually don't have to worry about a letter of recommendation. Okay. Private schools, most likely, a lot of them do require a letter of recommendation. Oftentimes, it's from one or two teachers and the counselor. Out of state, depending on the school, might also require one. Again, most likely from the counselor, but also possibly from a teacher as well. Community college does not require one. The military academy most likely will, and the military does not require a letter of recommendation. So just make sure that you are aware and you're looking individually in your schools. You'll learn that also there are some schools that are very specific about what they're asking for. They might say, we really want a letter of recommendation from two of your teachers. Make sure that one is in the humanities area. Make sure that one is in the STEM area. So lots of different ways, lots of things that that colleges are requiring. So we want to make sure students are paying attention to that. All right, so the counselor rec process, you do request that in the post-grad plan survey. All right, we sent that out to our seniors. We also had it during the presentation for them to fill out, and we sent it to their email. So one thing to double check with your seniors is to ask if they did complete that post-grad plan survey. Technically, that is honestly the only way that we know as counselors whether or not we need to set up a one-on-one meeting with your student to discuss their letter of recommendation. So if it's not filled out there, then we don't know. All right. The teacher rec process, oftentimes when you do find out who you need to ask a letter of rec from and what area you do need to, make sure that you ask for it in person, okay? Or don't just assume that they're going to do one or send it in an email. We encourage students to talk to their teacher one-on-one and ask them for it. Important to hopefully ask for a teacher that they've had in the past. And students should thank their teachers and recommenders and make sure to update that on their college decision. It's going to go over a little bit more on this page. So you're going to update for the one things that we are looking for in the checklist for our students on top of doing the post-grad plan survey is they're going to update their colleges they're applying to. They're going to do the student questionnaire. What's highlighted there is the guardian questionnaire, which we would love to have parents and guardians do if they are able to. It is optional, but a lot of times it gives us a great opportunity to learn more about your student that they may not have shared with us. All right, and then also to match the Common App. That is an opportunity for them to be able to go into Naviance if they've already created their Common App account and match it so that they're connecting and so that those two systems will talk to each other. So once we submit a letter on Naviance, it goes directly into Common App. We do prioritize our meetings with determined by deadlines. Okay, so if a student's earliest deadline is January 1st, we may not call them in for an individual meeting until we are done with all of our early action or early decision meetings. Okay, so just we will definitely meet with them, but we do time it by their deadlines. So as I mentioned before, which teacher do you ask, right? You want to make sure that it's a teacher that knows you well, obviously, and a class that you enjoyed. Hopefully it's a class that you were in recently and they teach a core subject. I think that, simply saying, oh, you got an A in this class, ask that teacher, that's not necessarily the case. A teacher may know you really well and had built a great relationship with you, and maybe you earned a B in that class, but they saw how hardworking you were, or they saw, how you persevered through a difficult situation. But make sure that you're asking it from a teacher that you have a good relationship with, and that they could speak to your strengths. All right. And again, certain colleges, some of them, especially selective ones, might be a little more specific. And depending on the major that you're applying to, might be very specific in what they're asking for. So, for example, like I mentioned before, they might want one from a humanities teacher and they might want one from your science teacher or math teacher. Okay. I did have one student last year where unfortunately I think she ended up applying to so many schools, probably like 25 plus schools, and it was pretty overwhelming. And for one of her top schools, she didn't realize that they were very specific with who they wanted a letter of rec from. And unfortunately, she didn't meet those two areas. I tried to call the school, we both did, to see if we could retract one of the letters and put in another one. And unfortunately, they just said, no, you can't do that. So it was a bummer all around. So that's why we always encourage students to narrow that list down so that you're not overwhelmed by the number of applications that you're doing, so you can kind of keep track of everything and keep like a spreadsheet so that who needs what and how many letters of rec and from what subject areas for which school. All right.
Okay, so financial aid, we will talk more about this. We do a financial aid night every fall. We don't quite have the date for that yet, but you'll be on the lookout for it. Really, at this point, there is an assembly bill that has been passed that's requiring all students to complete either the FAFSA or the CATA or an opt-out form. So either a financial aid application or an opt-out form. So that's the law. That's the assembly bill. However, that being said, we really encourage all seniors to have a financial aid application on file, um, kind of regardless of what their post-high school path is. Four-year colleges, two-year colleges, career and technical programs all can accept federal financial aid. And then that way too, if a student's plans change, they'll have a financial aid application by the deadline. Say someone thought they were going to go and join the workforce. They ended up deciding they wanted to take a few classes at DBC. You don't want to miss out on the FT3, which is what Miss Youngberg or Cheryl, we're all adults here, was talking about earlier. First time, full-time free tuition. Any student that completes the FAFSA and is a full-time student at DBC does not have to pay tuition. So lots of great perks that come along with this, even if families don't necessarily think that they'll qualify. Should anything change, you can have it on file. And a lot of times scholarships won't consider a student for a scholarship until the FAFSA or the CATA is done. And the reason for that is before they're giving out these very sought after dollars for college, they want to make sure that the student has exhausted every possible avenue. So even though you might have a sense that you might not qualify, they want to know that as well. So definitely encourage, and we'll have support for getting that done. Yes, and we are having a college and career fair October 25th. So this is a district-wide fair, so it is pretty sizable, over 100 different schools and career programs represented. And we are the host this year, so convenient for you all. So please come and join us the night of the 25th. I don't have the exact times on here. Typically, I would say 6 to 8 is a pretty typical time frame. Again, it's a lot of the people that will be reading our students' applications, and a lot of times they attended this school or at least live nearby it now, so they can kind of speak to what it's like to be there and give you information that you wouldn't be able to find on a website or a brochure, because they'll actually get to talk about, well, my favorite tradition on campus is this, and when I'm out on the weekends, here's what that looks like, and give that information. So really, really valuable opportunity. And like I said, careers and the military will be represented as well. So something for everyone here. And families are welcome too. So bring your student, make a night of it. Okay, so this was shown to your student to talk to them a little bit about kind of what their responsibility is in this process and what the school's responsibility is. So the students are responsible for their college apps, requesting and sending transcripts both from Cal High and well, requesting from Cal High, but requesting from outside institutions, if that applies as well, say they took a class at DBC or something like that, that will need to be sent to the colleges when requested. UCs and CSUs do not want transcripts yet. They go off of self-reported data, and then they might ask for transcripts sometimes at the mid-year, so after the semester. Other times they're not asking for it until the students have graduated. So this is why we keep harping on having a manageable college list, just because there's so many things to keep track of that the only way to kind of manage all that effectively is to have a reasonably sized list. So yes, transcripts requests go through Naviance, but UCs and CSUs specifically do not want them right now. Students would need to complete the letter of rec process if applicable. SAT, ACT scores, if they are applying to somewhere test optional or test required and they're choosing to send them, those would need to be requested directly through either the College Board or ACT. They want those original reports. Nothing from the school would suffice for that. Really important that if any deadlines change, that students would need to notify the recommenders, notify us if there's a new transcript deadline, and then those mid-year final reports, they'll happen later on in the school year. So mid-year is typically January, February, and then final report, we will meet with all seniors again to figure out where their transcripts need to go after they graduate. What we take care of on the school side, once they request in Naviance, we will send their official transcript. I saw a question earlier too about if students' senior year courses are shown on that. And yes, the transcript that we upload to Naviance does have their in-progress work, so that is there. We also send a school profile that gives colleges a little bit of insight into what our community is like, what we have to offer, right? So students aren't just evaluated within a vacuum. We give them information about here's what we have to offer at Cal. So that way, when they're looking at your student's application, they have a sense of where they're coming from. We also have the secondary school report that counselors fill out. And then of course, any recommendation letters if needed. Teachers submit their own recommendation letters as well as a teacher report. Okay. All right, so this was shown to your students for what their next steps are. Like we talked about earlier, the post-grad plan survey, that was a Google form they needed to fill out. One, so we have an idea of how we can support them this year, but two, it's also our way of knowing who requires a counselor letter and who we get to have a delightful conversation with and write them a lovely bragging letter. We love doing that every year. We hoped they bookmarked senior guide, so definitely encourage them to do that if they haven't. All students should be updating their colleges I'm applying to list in Naviance. I feel like calling it a college list is a little misleading because trade schools are also on there. So we want students 4-year colleges, 2-year colleges, vocational plans, all of that to be in Naviance. Attending the the college visits, like Cheryl was talking about, is a really valuable use of time. Just to get that insight. So those are happening several times a day for probably the next few months. And then we'll get you out that financial aid deadline as soon as we have it. So we also hope they're staying on top of their emails. As counselors, we can do a lot of things, but we can't go back in time. So the most heartbreaking thing is when students come to us, I missed a deadline, I didn't check my email, and we can call colleges with them and try to explain that, but some colleges, their deadlines are their deadlines. So that's why it's really important for your senior to stay on top of your email. Also, the UC-CSU, I mentioned this deadline earlier. The reason we bring it up is because we try to have a rule here at Cal that we want those deadlines, those applications, bad night not to be able to talk, isn't it? We want those applications submitted before students eat any turkey on Thanksgiving. It is notorious for crashing that night, and that is just a kind of stress that I don't wish on any senior. So please submit those early to avoid any technical issues. And then we talked a little bit about what y'all can do. So you're here with us, you're learning about what they learned about. This is specifically for you though. So something that we hear a lot of times with seniors is that their whole life kind of turns into college applications a lot of time, and it gets really exhausting for them when it feels like every conversation is about what are you doing after high school, and from neighbors and people they run into on the street and the mailman, and it's very well intended but can be a little overwhelming. So something that we've heard got feedback on is very helpful is families that set up like a weekly college date. So there's kind of a confined time to be able to hash through some of this because they definitely need your support, but we're learning and helping them navigate this process for themselves in the driver's seat while you're the trusty co-pilot. Proofreading, college essays, um, like it says here, typos, grammar, excellent, but really we want those essays, and the admissions officers want those essays to be in the student voice. It's the place in their application they get to shine through the most. We know students are not their transcripts, but this is a chance to say who they are outside of school, what their values are, and so that's why it needs to sound like a teenager wrote it. We want to hear from them. And the admissions officers have gotten pretty good at being able to suss out when an adult has been a little too involved with those. If you could complete that questionnaire on Naviance, help us brag on your students, we love that. And then FAFSA CATA, the financial aid application, it for anyone who's been through this process before, it's a little different this year. They're making some changes to hopefully simplify those applications. So it's not opening up until December, and the deadline will also be a little later this year. So more to come on that. But for anyone who had October 1st marked on their calendar for that, it'll actually be in December this year. The only information we have is sometime before the 31st. So not super clear there yet. Lastly, we're doing everything we can to help this process be as least stress as possible, but we know it's a big life change. A little bit of stress is to be expected. So just being that reassurance for your student that you'll get through this together, they have us to lean on, and whatever the outcome is going to be okay. All right, so yeah, that's basically what I was just saying. Here's the team looking all cute on our staff picture day. But we're gonna turn it over to some Q&A. I've seen some things pop up in the chat. I was trying not to get too distracted by it. So yeah, let's see what we got.
All right. So I think you already answered the question about the transcripts. One of the questions was picking and choosing AP scores we send to colleges. To be honest with you, a lot of the AP scores that you're going to be doing right now are going to be self-reported. Okay, you do self-report those scores. When it really matters when you're sending those AP scores is going to be when you've decided what college you're going to go to, and you want to know how many, how many units is Berkeley going to accept, or how many units is this college going to accept and use towards which class and degree. So a lot of that is done after you've been admitted. So right now it is self-report. So just worry about
And
that piece.
that too would depend on what the college testing policies are, right? Like test blind colleges aren't necessarily wanting to see that, whereas some test optional colleges are. I know there are a few colleges out there that specify they want students to report all of their AP scores. So that's, yeah, some of that, it depends I was talking about. That makes this
It is.
tricky to answer.
Yeah. The tag agreement is statewide. So that applies to all of the community colleges, and
Oh,
UCLA does not participate. What's
I
that?
think though, yeah, so it's definitely not a guarantee. Sometimes though, what will happen is um, schools give priority to local students. So
Right.
that could be what you're referring to, but that would be a question for the individual. Oh, I'm also realizing, Cheryl, I don't think that everybody can see all the questions. So we
Oh,
might need
okay.
to read what the question is.
Thank you.
This was about a tag agreement at a college in Southern California. So like, for instance, our students being Cal High grads, they get priority at like CSU East Bay and I think SF State because it's local. So that might be what you're referring to there.
Right. Yeah. So sometimes
It's
some of them give
priority.
priority to the region, but there isn't an actual technical tag guarantee.
Naviance, little kind of nuts and bolts. We can get into those all day long. I think probably the most effective use of time here would be if your student is having a Naviance problem, please just have them come see their counselor with their device. That tends to be the best way to get anything with Naviance sorted out.
And so submitting test scores, again, that's going to be through the testing agency, through College Board or ACT.
Yeah, and what we meant when we said if you wanted to remove test scores from Naviance, what we've heard sometimes, they might have fixed this though, is that if a student links their Naviance and their Common App account, it might put those scores in their Common App, and if they're choosing not to send, then that would be how to get rid of them.
How do we send the LOR, the letter of rec? Actually, your teachers and your counselor will be sending those. So that is not something the student will have to worry about. We will send those directly to the university on their behalf. And they will all, I promise you, they will all speak to each other. So we will send it for that student and it attaches to their application. All right.
When it's talking, okay, when it's saying a counselor letter of rec, that is talking about us.
Yes.
So not like an outside college counselor. It wants their school counselor because we can speak to them within the context of Cal High. And whether or not a student needs a counselor rec is kind of separate from teacher recommendations. A lot of times, if a college is wanting one, they might want the other. But that's really what we're saying when it comes down to doing college research and seeing what those schools require. What I will throw out as a bonus is the Common App. It's one of the most popular application websites. I don't know if we said this. Not, your students aren't applying through Naviance. Naviance is just our tool to get information to the colleges. So students will apply through the UC application or Cal State apply for CSUs. Common App is a really popular one for a lot of private and out-of-state colleges. So there's something on there if a student logs in, it has the requirements grid, and it's this big old list that says a lot of the deadlines, what materials are required, what letters of rec are required, all in one spreadsheet. So I highly recommend once your student has added all their Common App colleges to download that so they have that at a glance.
Yes, great question. But yes, very, very clear that they want to hear from the counselor of the high school they're attending. All right, are data in Naviance self-reported or official ones? I'll let you answer that, Kelly.
I'm not sure what data they're referring to. Like your transcripts and everything are official. If you're talking about the scattergrams, those are self-reported from last year or previous year's graduates.
Correct. So basically, we just kind of sync it with Infinite Campus, our school system, information system. But in regards to whether they've been accepted or waitlisted or deferred or where they're attending, that is all self-reported by the seniors.
Okay, deadline for requesting letter of rec. There's not a hard and fast deadline per se, but recommenders need at least 2, preferably 3 weeks notice to be able to write a effective letter. What is the class of 2023-2024? A number that should go in Common App. That is available on the guidebook, one of the many pieces of data there. So please check that out.
Absolutely. There was one that we might have skipped. How can we find the hidden rankings so that we are not blindly applying to UCs? There is no hidden ranking. I wish we could crack the code on this, but there really isn't. I mean, I think that you can certainly look at trends from previous years and the previous graduating classes. As you know, obviously, there are certain majors that are impacted, but year to year, what they tell us when we go to the UC conference is that they definitely try and evaluate students holistically. So as much as they are looking at transcripts and the rigor and all of that, they're also carefully looking at your personal essays and how you respond to those and really trying to learn about the individual person. So there is a lot more emphasis in looking at those applications holistically with this UC.
Do Naviance scatter plots filter by year? Not to my knowledge off the top of my head, but
Yeah,
I
and
could
I
be
don't
wrong.
right. I don't know that they do it on the student end.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think the reason for that is to protect student privacy. Naviance only does a scatter plot when it has enough data points because they don't want students to be able to figure out a certain student's data based on like, oh, there was one kid that got in and I know who that is, so that's their information.
yeah, perfect. When will the current school profile be available for us to see? It's actually available on our counseling website already, and it's also linked on our senior guidebook.
We talked about letter of rec deadlines, external letters of recommendation. So what this is referring to is people that are not teachers. So if your student is applying to a school that accepts what they call an other recommendation, that's their words, not mine. Like a coach or a pastor, maybe their boss, that would need to be directly through Common App. That would not go through Naviance. The student has to put in their person's email and a link will get sent directly to them. With the letter of rec process, it should never be in a student's hands. The student can never be the one submitting it, or like we talked about earlier with the FERPA rights, it just doesn't mean anything, right? They're wanting to trust that everything, as glowing as we said, isn't influenced by the student being able to see it.
Right. When should a student apply for a 4-year program versus a 2-year program? So the 4-year program, the colleges, I know that we've been talking a lot about that, and that is because that's what we're doing right now. The deadlines do tend to vary, but most of them are anywhere ranging, depending if you're doing early decision, like Kelly had mentioned before, or early action. The UCs and the CSUs is definitely November 30th. But otherwise, it's typically in the fall semester and sometimes like around January 1st or very early in January for 4-year schools. Okay, some of them do have rolling, like she mentioned before as well, where sometimes you can apply well into the spring semester too. Okay, 2-year programs for community colleges, that does happen in the spring semester. So that is when DVC and Las Positas, they typically do come to the high school right around February. They go over the application process and any changes that they might have, any requirements, and we make sure that students are ready to go to apply in the spring semester for any community colleges.
Yeah, what I will throw out there too is while these 4-year applications can sometimes take several hours and definitely longer than that if essays are required and revisions and all that, the 2-year program application, I would say probably takes students about 45 minutes. So it's a lot more straightforward. So we will support them with that in the spring.
Yes, yes. Lots of great questions, and we have a lot of information on here. So this particular presentation will be available on YouTube if you guys are bored and need to be entertained and want to see it again.
Or
Or
send it to someone who wasn't here.
there you go. Or make sure that you check out that senior guidebook. I promise you, there is so much information on there, including some tips when applying to the UCs and CSUs that actually tells you exactly how to look through your transcript and what to put on there. So lots of things to go through there. We will be holding some workshops during tutorial for our seniors as well in regards to the UC application, the CSU application. I think we also did it on the personal insight questions, right, Kelly?
Hmm.
And so those things we will be offering for our seniors if they need some extra help with it or have some general questions or individual questions that they need to ask us. All right. I don't know. I think we got all the questions. Do you, Kelly? Do you think we did? I'm just trying to scroll through as I'm learning this process here. Program.
Yes, we were I published a couple questions about accessing different things so people could see it. The students access Naviance through their student portal. So they're using their SRVUSD login to get into that. And then there's a tile there. Again, we went over this in more depth with your seniors because they're the ones who need to know what clicks to click. But if they have any questions, have them come see us. And then the senior guidebook is on the counseling website. So if you Google Cal High Counseling, it'll pop right up.
Yeah. And I do want to emphasize that we do have drop-in times before and after for our students before and after school during brunch and lunch. And we fully expect to see our seniors on a regular basis this time of year. So if they're coming in having, a quick question here or have a couple of questions, they absolutely can come in during those drop-in times. They don't have to set up a formal appointment with us. Obviously, if they do need more time, we're more than happy to meet with them. But a lot of times kids are just dropping in during brunch, lunch, or coming in right after school and asking a few quick questions. And that is what we are there for. And to be honest, this is I've been doing this for 2 decades, and I fully expect to see my seniors on a regular basis this time of year. So please do encourage them to come and see us if they have any questions. All right, I think we are good, Kelly.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for joining us. I know this is just how you wanted to spend a Tuesday or Monday night. It's still Monday, isn't it, Cheryl?
Yes, it is. You could go back to watching Monday Night Football.
Excellent. Thank you all. We will get this posted on YouTube, and please send your students to our office. They're our favorite people to see. Thank you.